The ships came on a Tuesday morning in June. Commander Sira Okonkwo stood on the roof of the United Earth Defense Building in Geneva and watched the sky turn dark with alien vessels. There were thousands of them. They blocked out the sun like a swarm of metal locusts. She had spent her whole life preparing for this moment. First contact. The day humanity would finally meet life from beyond the stars. But as she watched those ships descend, she felt no wonder. She felt only dread. The Velanthari Dominion did not come to say hello. They came to take. Within hours, their leader appeared on every screen on Earth. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 eyes that seemed to look through everything. His name was High Archon Velaneth, and he spoke in a voice that sounded like stones grinding together. "You are species number 4891, he said. "You now belong to the Velanthari Dominion. You will serve. You will obey. Resistance is not possible. Resistance is not logical. You are small. We are infinite. The world governments tried to fight. They launched missiles. They sent jets. They fired everything they had at the massive ships that hung over their cities. The Velanthari did not even bother to shoot back. They simply turned on their shields and watched as human weapons bounced off like raindrops on glass. Then they showed humanity what real weapons looked like. They fired one beam at one city. Just one. The city was called Brisbane. 1 million people lived there. After the beam hit, nothing lived there. Not people, not animals, not even bacteria. The Velanthari had turned it into glass. After that, the fighting stopped. Sarah remembered the day the overseers arrived at her base. They walked in like they owned the place. Because now they did. They were tall and moved with a strange grace. And they looked at humans the way humans might look at insects. Not with hatred, not even with disgust. Just with complete and total disinterest. "You will dismantle your space program," the lead overseer told her. His name was Collector Vreth, and he would become the most hated being on Earth. "Servitor species do not need ships. You will mine. You will build. You will serve. This is your purpose now." Sira wanted to kill him. She wanted to wrap her hands around his thin gray neck and squeeze until those 4 eyes went dark. But she was smart. She knew that killing one overseer would only bring death to millions more humans. So she nodded. She obeyed. And she waited. The first year of occupation was the hardest. The Velanthari took everything. They took Earth's resources. They took Earth's brightest minds and put them to work in alien factories. They took Earth's children and tested them for useful abilities. Those who had none were sent to the mines on the moon. Those who had useful skills were sent to serve on Velanthari worlds far from home. Humanity had never known such complete defeat. For all of human history, there had always been hope. Even in the darkest times, people believed that tomorrow might be better. But under the Velanthari, there was no tomorrow. There was only endless service. There was only the knowledge that humanity would spend the rest of its existence as slaves. But the Velanthari made a mistake. They were so sure of their power that they never bothered to learn about humanity. They never studied human history. They never read about the empires that had tried to crush the human spirit before them. The Romans, the Mongols, the British, the Nazis. So many had tried. All of them had fallen. Sira received her first message from the Resistance on a cold night in December. It came hidden inside a shipment of mining equipment, encoded in a way that no Velanthari scanner could detect. The message was simple. "My name is Prometheus. They gave us 6 months to forget freedom. Give me 6 years to remind them why that was a mistake." At first, Sira did not believe. She had seen the power of the Velanthari. She had watched them turn a city to glass without effort. What could humans possibly do against such might? But then she started to notice things. Small things. A scientist who worked a little too slowly. A factory worker who made tiny errors in her welding. A translator who sometimes changed the meaning of words just slightly. The Resistance was everywhere, hiding in plain sight, doing small acts of defiance that the Velanthari were too arrogant to notice. Sarah made contact with Prometheus through a series of dead drops and coded messages. She learned that he was building something. A network. A web of resistance that stretched across every continent. Scientists were secretly studying stolen Velanthari technology. Engineers were building hidden workshops in abandoned mines and underwater caves. Soldiers were training in forests and deserts, learning to fight an enemy that thought them too weak to be a threat. "They see us as animals," Prometheus told her in one of his messages. "Let them. Animals can bite. Sarah became one of the leaders of this secret war. She used her position in the old military to move people and supplies. She helped smuggle scientists to hidden labs. She passed information about Velanthari patrol routes and security weaknesses, and every day, she smiled at Collector Vrith and pretended to be the obedient servant he expected her to be. The hardest part was watching her people suffer while she did nothing visible to help them. She saw families torn apart. She saw children taken from their parents. She saw old men worked to death in alien mines, and she had to stay silent. She had to keep playing her role. Because the resistance was not ready. Not yet. One night, she stood on the same roof where she had first watched the ships arrive. The sky was different now. The Velanthari had put orbital platforms up there, giant rings of metal that could glass entire continents if humanity stepped out of line. They were a constant reminder of who held the power. But Sarah looked at those platforms and she did not feel despair. She felt something else. Something the Velanthari would never understand. She felt patient. "You think you know us," she whispered to the sky. "You think you understand what we are, but you only see what we show you. You see the workers in your factories. You see the miners in your tunnels. You see a broken species that has accepted its chains." She smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "You don't see the scientists who study your technology while pretending to be janitors. You don't see the soldiers who train in the deep places where your scanners cannot reach. You don't see the children who learn your language so they can one day use it against you." The orbital platforms glowed softly in the night sky, beautiful and terrible. "You came here to break us, but you cannot break what you do not understand. And you will never understand us, because you never bothered to try." Somewhere in the darkness below, a secret workshop hummed with activity. Somewhere beneath the ocean, engineers tested a prototype weapon built from stolen Velanthari parts. Somewhere in a hidden cave, young soldiers learned how to kill aliens 10 times their size. The chains were still there. The occupation was still total. But something was changing. Something was growing. And one day soon, the Velanthari would learn what every empire before them had learned. Humanity does not break. Humanity waits. And when the moment comes, humanity rises. Sarah turned away from the sky and walked back into the building. She had work to do. The resistance was growing, and the clock was ticking. In 6 years, the Velanthari would learn the truth. They had not conquered Earth. They had only awakened it. 6 years had passed since the ships first darkened Earth's sky. 6 years of chains. 6 years of silence. 6 years of secrets growing in the dark. Dr. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked at the device on his workbench. It was small enough to fit in his hand, but it contained knowledge that could change everything. For 3 years, he had pretended to be a simple maintenance worker in a Velanthari research facility. He cleaned floors. He fixed broken machines. He smiled and bowed and acted like the perfect servant. And every night, he stole. Small things at first. Data chips, broken components, scraps of technology that the Velanthari threw away without a second thought. He took them to his hidden lab beneath an old coal mine in West Virginia, and he studied them with a team of scientists who officially did not exist. Tonight, he had finally done it. He had cracked the secret of Velanthari faster than light travel. "Prometheus," he said into his communicator. "The bird has learned to fly. Across the world. In a bunker beneath the ruins of what used to be called Cairo." Sarah Okonkwo received the message. She closed her eyes and allowed herself one moment of pure joy. Then she opened them again and got back to work. The plan was moving into its final phase. The resistance had grown beyond anything she had imagined. Every continent had its cells. Every city had its spies. Humans worked in Velanthari factories and military bases and government buildings, smiling their servant smiles while they memorized patrol routes, stole access codes, and mapped every weakness in the occupation. The Velanthari still saw nothing. To them, humans were too stupid and too broken to be a threat. They did not notice that their human workers sometimes made small mistakes that slowly weakened their systems. They did not notice that important files sometimes disappeared. They did not notice that their human translators sometimes changed the meaning of orders in tiny ways that caused confusion. They especially did not notice that humanity had been building an army. The signal came on a night with no moon. At exactly midnight, resistance cells on every continent moved at once. They had practiced this moment for years. Every fighter knew exactly what to do. Every team had exactly the right tools. Every target had been studied until they could attack it with their eyes closed. The first thing they hit was the communication network. The Velanthari had built relay towers all over Earth to keep their forces connected. In a single hour, every single one of those towers went dark. Human technicians who had pretended to maintain them for years simply flipped the switches they had secretly installed. Other teams used explosives. Others used computer viruses. The method did not matter. What mattered was the result. For the first time in 6 years, the Velanthari occupation was blind and deaf. Collector Vreeth was in his command center in Geneva when the lights went out. He tried to contact his forces. Nothing. He tried to reach the orbital platforms. Nothing. He tried to access the planetary defense grid. Nothing. For 72 hours, he was alone. That was all the time humanity needed. Across the planet, resistance fighters attacked every Velanthari base they could reach. They used weapons they had built in secret, designed from stolen technology. They used tactics they had developed over 6 years of watching their enemy. They knew every guard rotation. They knew every security code. They knew where the Velanthari kept their weapons and how to turn those weapons against their owners. In New York, a team of former soldiers stormed a detention center and freed 10,000 human prisoners. In Tokyo, engineers took control of a Velanthari weapons factory and turned its own products against the garrison. In Lagos, fighters destroyed a landing pad full of alien shuttles before they could take off. But the real battle was happening in space. For years, the Velanthari had used human pilots to fly cargo shuttles between Earth and the orbital platforms. These pilots were considered completely harmless. They had been broken and trained, and tested for loyalty. The Velanthari trusted them completely. That trust was their greatest mistake. At the same moment the communication towers went dark, 200 human pilots turned their shuttles around and headed for the orbital platforms. They were not carrying cargo anymore. They were carrying bombs. The platforms were enormous, the size of cities, armed with weapons that could destroy continents. But they had one weakness. The Velanthari had never imagined that their own shuttles might attack them. Their shields were designed to stop missiles from the outside, not explosions from the inside. One by one, the platforms fell. Sarah watched from her bunker as the sky lit up with distant explosions. Each flash was an orbital platform dying. Each flash was another chain breaking. Beside her, her officers cheered and cried and hugged each other. After 6 years of silent suffering, they were finally fighting back. But she knew the hard part was still coming. The Velanthari sent a pacification fleet. 50 warships, the finest in their armada, commanded by Admiral Thraxus himself. He was a legend among his people, a warrior who had crushed 100 rebellions on 100 worlds. He expected to arrive at Earth and find a primitive species waiting to be disciplined. He found something very different. The Battle of Phobos lasted 3 days. The human fleet was smaller and weaker, built from stolen technology and hidden shipyards. They should have been destroyed in hours, but they had something the Velanthari did not. They had nothing left to lose. Human ships flew into battle with a fury that shocked the alien commanders. They took risks no Velanthari would ever take. They sacrificed themselves to protect each other. They fought not like soldiers following orders, but like parents protecting their children. When Admiral Thraxus ordered a retreat, he had lost 37 of his 50 ships. He had been beaten by a species that his empire considered barely more than animals. The message spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. A servitor species had rebelled. A servitor species had won. The Velanthari dominion, which had ruled for 11,000 years, had been humiliated by creatures they had dismissed as tools. On Earth, the survivors of the occupation gathered in the streets. For the first time in 6 years, they looked up at the sky and saw no alien platforms watching them. The chains were not completely broken. The war was not over. But something had changed. Sira addressed the planet from the steps of the ruined United Nations building. Her face was tired and scarred, but her eyes burned with a fire that no amount of suffering could extinguish. "They came to break us," she said. "They took our children. They destroyed our cities. They tried to turn us into tools. But they forgot something important. They forgot what happens when you push humanity into a corner." She raised her fist to the sky. "We push back." Across the planet, millions of voices rose in a cheer that seemed to shake the very ground. The Ember War had only just begun. The Velanthari would send more fleets, more battles would come, more blood would be spilled. But humanity had remembered something it had almost forgotten. It had remembered how to hope. and that hope would burn brighter than any weapon the Velanthari could build. The fire had been lit. Now it would spread. In a hidden laboratory, Dr. Marcus Chen looked at the blueprints for humanity's first faster-than-light ship. They had won the first battle. Now they needed to prepare for the war. It was time to reach for the stars. The victory at Phobos was just the beginning. Sarah Okonkwo knew that even as she celebrated with her people, the Velanthari High Command was already planning their revenge. One lost fleet meant nothing to an empire that controlled 12,000 star systems. They would come back. They would come back with more ships, more weapons, and more rage than before. Humanity had to be ready. In the year after the Ember War, Syrah was named Supreme Commander of the newly formed United Earth Navy. It was a title she never wanted, but she accepted it anyway. Someone had to lead humanity through what was coming. Someone had to make the hard choices. Her first choice was the hardest. She called it the Sol Doctrine. We cannot win by fighting everywhere, she told her admirals in the war room. We don't have enough ships, we don't have enough soldiers, but we have something the Velanthari don't expect. We have our home. She pointed to the holographic map of the solar system. Every rock, every moon, every empty piece of space. This is our fortress. We know it better than any alien ever could. We were born here, we grew up here, and we will die here before we let them take it again. The Sol Doctrine was simple in concept but brutal in practice. Humanity would turn the entire solar system into a weapon. Asteroids were moved into defensive positions and filled with explosives. Hidden bases were built on every moon of Jupiter and Saturn. Weapons platforms were disguised as mining stations. Fleets were hidden in the rings of Saturn, waiting like wolves in tall grass. The Velanthari came back in the year 2256. They sent not one fleet but three, led by High Admiral Velthoris herself. She had been ordered by the High Archon to make an example of humanity, to crush them so completely that no servitor species would ever dare rebel again. She brought 500 warships, the largest invasion force in Velanthari history. What followed was 6 years of the bloodiest warfare humanity had ever known. The first battle of Jupiter lasted 2 weeks. Human forces used the giant planet's massive gravity well to trap Velanthari ships in deadly ambushes. They would emerge from the swirling clouds, fire their weapons, and disappear again before the aliens could respond. Velthoris lost 80 ships before she finally broke through. But breaking through only meant facing the next layer of defenses. Mars became a graveyard of warships. The humans had fortified the red planet with weapons that could crack a moon. Underground factories pumped out new fighters every day. For every human ship the Velanthari destroyed, 2 more seemed to appear. And the humans fought in ways the Velanthari could not understand. In the Velanthari Dominion, individual lives were sacred. Their strict caste system valued every member of the ruling class. To lose a ship was a tragedy. To lose a commander was a disaster. They fought carefully, protecting themselves, always looking for the safe victory. Humans did not fight that way. When Captain Li Wei found her ship surrounded by enemy vessels, she did not surrender. She flew straight into the largest one and detonated her reactor. 3 Velanthari warships died with her. Her last words were transmitted to every human vessel. Tell my son I flew with the sun. When the civilian colony on Europa was threatened, the colonists did not wait for rescue. They rigged their entire settlement to explode and lured the Velanthari ground forces inside. 12,000 humans died. 80,000 Velanthari died with them. When a Velanthari admiral offered the people of Luna a chance to surrender, they broadcast their answer across all frequencies. It was a single word, spoken by every man, woman, and child on the moon at the same time. No, the cost was terrible. Earth was scarred by orbital strikes that killed hundreds of millions. Mars lost half its population. Europa was shattered into a ring of ice and debris. Humanity paid for its freedom in blood and fire and tears, but they did not break. High Admiral Velthoris sent a message to the High Archon after her 4th invasion fleet was destroyed. These creatures are insane, she wrote. They do not value their own lives. They fight without logic, without reason. They would rather die than submit. I do not know how to defeat an enemy who has no fear of death. The High Archon's response was simple. Then kill them all. But by then, it was too late. In a hidden shipyard beneath the ice of Titan, Dr. Marcus Chen watched the first human faster-than-light ship come to life. They had called it the Prometheus, after the figure from Greek mythology who brought fire to humanity. After the mysterious leader who had first sparked the resistance all those years ago, the ship was crude compared to Velanthari vessels. It was smaller, slower, and less elegant, but it was human, built by human hands, powered by human ingenuity, and it worked. "Where do we go first?" asked Jin Yoshida, the young captain chosen to command the vessel. He was only 30 years old, but he had survived the Battle of Mars and the Siege of Luna. He had watched his family die in an orbital strike. He had nothing left but the mission. Chen smiled. "Anywhere we want. For the first time in history, the stars are open to us." The war in Sol continued. More fleets came. More battles were fought. More lives were lost. But something had changed. Humanity was no longer just defending. They were preparing to attack. Sarah Okonkwo stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking out at the stars. Behind her, the solar system was burning. Ahead of her lay the unknown darkness of the galaxy. "They thought they could cage us in our own home," she said. "They were wrong. Sol is not our cage. Sol is our foundation. And from here, we will reach out and touch every corner of this galaxy." She turned to her officers, her eyes filled with a determination that had been forged in 6 years of war. "We've proven we can survive. Now it's time to prove we can win. Not just here. Not just in Sol. Everywhere. Every world they've conquered. Every species they've enslaved. We're going to show them all what humanity really is." She pointed at the stars. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for everyone they ever stepped on. Everyone they ever called a servitor. Everyone who ever forgot what freedom felt like." The first human FTL fleet jumped out of Sol in the year 2261. 12 ships, carrying hope and fury in equal measure. They were headed for Velanthari space. Not to destroy, not to conquer, to liberate. The Velanthari had spent 11,000 years building their empire by teaching the galaxy that resistance was impossible. They were about to learn that they had been wrong, and they were about to learn it from the species they had dismissed as animals. Admiral Jin Yoshida had never seen anything like the Kethrani. They were tall and thin, with skin that shimmered like water in the light. Their eyes were large and sad, and they moved with a grace that seemed almost like dancing. For 800 years, they had served the Velanthari Dominion. They had forgotten what freedom even meant. When the human ships appeared in their sky, the Kethrani did not know what to think. Their Velanthari masters had told them that the humans were monsters, savages, animals who had somehow gotten lucky in a few small battles. The Kethrani had been taught to fear them, but when Jin landed on their world with a small team of Marines, he did not come with weapons raised. He came with his hands open. "We are not here to conquer you," he told the Kethrani leaders. "We are not here to replace your masters with new masters. We are here to tell you something your masters never wanted you to know." He looked into their sad eyes and spoke words that had not been heard on that world for 8 centuries. "You are free." The eldest Kethrani, a being so old that his skin had turned from blue to silver, began to weep. Fluid ran down his face that his younger people had never seen before. He did not know he still had tears left. "We forgot," he whispered. "We forgot what that word meant. We forgot we were ever anything but servants." Jin placed his hand on the old one's shoulder. "Then let us help you remember. The liberation of Kethran IV was the first of many." As word spread about what the humans were doing, other species began to reach out in secret. The Morseti, a race of small beings who had served the Dominion as engineers. The Vyloth, once great warriors who had been reduced to gladiators for Velanthari entertainment. The Scythians, masters of stealth and shadow who had been forced to serve as spies and assassins. Each of them received the same offer. Not a demand for loyalty, not a requirement to serve, just a simple choice. Join us and be free. Or don't join us and be free anyway. But if you do join us, we can help you stay that way. The Terran Compact was born not in a treaty hall but in 100 small conversations on 100 occupied worlds. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years found themselves sitting at the same table, looking at each other without hatred for the first time. The humans did not ask them to forget their differences. They only asked them to remember what they had in common. They had all been slaves. And now, together, they could all be free. The Velanthari High Command watched in growing horror as their empire began to crack. For 11,000 years, no servitor species had ever successfully rebelled. Now they were losing worlds faster than they could count. High Archon Veleneth addressed his council with fury in his eyes. How is this possible? They are animals. They are nothing. His advisors had no good answers. They tried to explain that the humans fought differently than any species the Dominion had ever faced. They did not just want to win. They wanted to free everyone else too. And that made them dangerous in a way that the Velenthari had never imagined. When we conquered the Kethrani, one advisor said, we took their warriors and their leaders and we broke them. After a generation, they forgot how to resist. But the humans do not try to break anyone. They try to remind them of who they used to be. And once a species remembers its old strength, we cannot make them forget again. The Dominion tried everything to stop the spread. They sent assassins after human leaders. The assassins never returned. They tried to bribe other species to betray the compact. Those species joined the compact instead. They threatened to destroy worlds that supported the humans. The humans helped those worlds build defenses. In 8 years, 94 species had joined the Terran Compact or declared independence from the Dominion. 94 species that had served in silence for centuries were suddenly standing on their own feet, and they all looked to the humans with something the galaxy had never seen before: gratitude. Sarah Okonkwo was no longer Supreme Commander. She had given up that title to take a new one: Chancellor of the Terran Compact. She was not comfortable with politics. She missed the simple clarity of battle. But she understood that this war would not be won with weapons alone. She addressed the galaxy from the liberated world of Sethrax's Prime. It had once been a beautiful Velenthari colony, filled with parks and towers and the finest art in the galaxy. The humans had conquered it in a single day, not because they were stronger, but because the Velenthari soldiers there had surrendered. They had been watching the humans for years. They had seen how they treated the species they freed. They had realized that humanity was not fighting for revenge. Humanity was fighting for something better. We were told we were too young, Sarah said, her voice carried across 1,000 worlds. We were told we were too primitive, too small to matter. But we remembered something the Dominion forgot. She looked into the cameras, and her eyes seemed to reach through space itself to touch every being listening. Every empire is built on the backs of those it calls lesser. But those backs can stand upright. Those hands can build something new. Those voices can speak words that have not been spoken for thousands of years. She raised her fist. Freedom, justice, hope. These are not just human words. They belong to everyone who has ever looked at their chains and dreamed of breaking them. The response came from across the galaxy. Species that had never known the Dominion's rule sent messages of support. Species that were still enslaved began their own secret resistance movements. The Terran Compact became more than an alliance. It became an idea that spread faster than any ship could travel. The idea that no one deserved to be a slave. In the great throne room of Velenthar Prime, High Archon Veleneth watched the reports come in. His empire was crumbling. His fleets were failing. His people were starting to whisper questions that had never been asked before. Questions about whether the Dominion was as strong as they had always believed. Questions about whether the old ways were the right ways. He made a decision. We will fall back to Velenthar Prime, he commanded. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have left. We will make our stand at the heart of the galaxy. His advisors were shocked. But Archon, if we abandon the outer territories are already lost, he interrupted. The disease these humans carry cannot be stopped with small battles. We must cut it out at the source. We must destroy them so completely that the galaxy forgets they ever existed. He rose from his throne, his 4 eyes burning with ancient pride. For 11,000 years, we have ruled the stars. We will not fall to animals. We will not fall at all. Let them come to Velenthar Prime. Let them bring their little alliance and their pathetic ideas about freedom. He looked out at the stars, seeing not the beauty of space but only the enemies who threatened his power. We will teach them what happens to those who challenge the Dominion. We will teach them, and the galaxy will remember, forever. The final battle was coming. Both sides knew it. The Velenthari were gathering their strength. The Compact was doing the same, and across the galaxy, species that had been silent for thousands of years began to sharpen their claws, check their weapons, and prepare to fight for something they had almost forgotten existed: the future. The galaxy had never seen a fleet like the one that gathered at the edge of Velenthari space. 1,200 ships from 112 species. all flying under the same flag for the first time in history. The banner of the Terran Compact fluttered in the digital displays of 1,000 different bridges, and beneath it, beings who had once been enemies stood together as allies. Admiral Jin Yoshida looked at the readiness reports and felt a strange mix of pride and fear. The Kathrani had sent their water ships, vessels that moved like living things through the void. The Scythians had brought shadow cruisers that could appear and disappear like ghosts. The Morsetti had built weapons that could crack moons. And at the center of it all, the human fleet, scarred and battered from years of war, but still burning with the same fire that had started in secret workshops on occupied Earth. They had all come for the same reason. They had all come to end the Dominion. Valanthar Prime sat at the heart of the galaxy, orbiting a star so old that it had been ancient when the first Valanthari learned to walk. For 11,000 years, it had been the throne of an empire. Every decision that had shaped the galaxy had been made in its halls. Every species that had been conquered had been brought there in chains to kneel before the High Archon. Now it would witness something new. High Archon Valaneth had gathered everything he had left. 3,000 warships, the greatest fleet ever assembled, under the Dominion flag. The platforms above Valanthar Prime bristled with weapons that could destroy stars. Every soldier, every pilot, every warrior in the Empire had been called home for this final stand. They will break against us like waves against stone, Valaneth told his commanders. They are many, but they are weak. They are united, but they are different. When the battle turns against them, their alliance will crack. They will remember their old hatreds. They will abandon each other. He was wrong. The Battle of the Core began with a wave of Scythian shadow cruisers emerging from nothing in the middle of the Valanthari formation. They were not there to destroy. They were there to confuse. For 3 hours, they danced through the enemy fleet, drawing fire, causing chaos, making the Valanthari chase shadows while the real attack was prepared. Then the Morsetti weapons fired. The smallest beings in the compact had built the biggest guns. Beams of energy that could crack moons lanced across space, tearing through Valanthari shields that had never been tested against such power. Ship after ship exploded. The Valanthari tried to regroup, but every time they formed a new line, the Scythians disrupted it again. And then the humans came. They did not fly like the Valanthari expected. They did not hold back. They did not try to survive. Every human ship flew straight into the heart of the enemy formation, firing everything they had, taking hits that would have stopped any other species. When their shields failed, they used their hulls. When their weapons died, they rammed. When their ships broke apart, the escape pods kept fighting. The Kathrani covered them with their water ships, absorbing damage meant for human vessels. The Villoth, once gladiators, now warriors again, boarded enemy ships and fought hand to hand. The Morven dreadnoughts, giants of a species that had been pacified for millennia, fired their ancient weapons for the first time in 3,000 years. 112 species, fighting as one. The battle lasted 19 days. By the end, the space around Valanthar Prime was filled with the debris of thousands of ships. The Compact had lost half its fleet, but the Dominion had lost everything. Admiral Yoshida watched as the last Valanthari flagship, the personal vessel of High Archon Valaneth himself, took hit after hit. Its shields were failing. Its weapons were gone. It was dying, slowly and painfully, just like the empire it represented. A communication channel opened. Valaneth's face appeared on the screen. He was old, older than Yoshida had expected. His 4 eyes were tired, and for the first time, they held something the human had never seen in a Valanthari. Doubt. What are you? Valaneth asked. His voice was no longer proud. It was simply curious. We have ruled for 11,000 years. We have conquered 10,000 species. None of them ever did what you have done. None of them ever fought like this. None of them ever freed others instead of just saving themselves. He leaned forward, truly wanting to understand. What are you? Yoshida thought of his family, dead in an orbital strike. He thought of the years of occupation. He thought of the slaves he had freed and the allies who had died beside him. He thought of everything humanity had suffered and everything they had chosen to become. We are humanity, he said, and we remember what it is to be chained. That memory doesn't make us vengeful. It makes us unwilling to see others in chains. He paused, letting the words sink in. You conquered us because you thought strength meant domination. You ruled for 11,000 years because you taught the galaxy that power was everything. But you were wrong. Real strength is not about stepping on others. Real strength is about lifting them up. Veleneth's flagship exploded. The last High Archon of the Velenthari Dominion died watching his empire crumble around him. He died still not understanding what had defeated him. In the days that followed, the Compact did something that shocked the galaxy. They did not claim Velenthari territory. They did not enslave the Velenthari people. They did not take revenge for the suffering they had endured. Instead, they offered a choice. Every former Dominion world could choose its own future. Join the Compact if they wished. Remain independent if they preferred. Rebuild however they wanted. The only rule was simple. No slavery, no conquest, no chains. The Galactic Concordat was born in the Great Hall of Velenthar Prime, now renamed Liberation. 112 species signed their names to a document that promised something the galaxy had never known. A union of equals, a community of the free, a future where no one would ever be called a servitor again. Chancellor Sarah Okonkwo stood before the assembly for the last time. She was old now, her hair white, her body scarred from decades of war, but her eyes still burned with the same fire they had held on that rooftop in Geneva. Watching the ships descend, "We came to the stars as slaves," she said. "We were told we were too primitive, too young, too small to matter. The Dominion thought they could break us. They thought they could crush our spirit and make us forget what we were." She looked around at the faces watching her. Kethrani and Morsetti, Scythian and Vyloth, human and former Velenthari, all sitting together in the same room. They were wrong. Not just about us. About everything. They believed that power came from domination. They believed that the strong should rule the weak. They believed that the galaxy was a ladder, and everyone had to climb over everyone else to reach the top. She shook her head slowly. "But we proved that there is another way. We proved that when people stand together, when they lift each other up instead of pushing each other down, they can do things that seem impossible. We freed a galaxy. Not alone. Together." She raised her hand in a final salute to the beings who had fought beside her. The stars were never meant to be owned. They were meant to be shared. And now, at last, they belong to everyone. The assembly rose to their feet. Every species, every being, every former slave and former master, standing together. The applause echoed through the halls of liberation, and it seemed to shake the very stars. In the years that followed, the galaxy healed. Wars ended. Trade routes opened. Species that had been enemies for millennia learned to be neighbors. It was not perfect. Nothing ever is, but it was better than anything that had come before. And at the center of it all, humanity stood. Not as rulers, not as conquerors, just as friends. Just as the species that had reminded the galaxy what freedom meant. They had entered the stars as slaves. They left them as liberators. And the stars, at last, were free.